But I think we're starting off because our audience is international as well. We know you're from the US, but what part were you sort of born and raised?
I was born in North Carolina, in
Okay,
Southern Pines, North Carolina, which is a golf town. It's actually one of the premier golf cities in the world, and pretty much everybody who is anybody in the golf world, they come through there to play, or they have a home there, and it's really quite funny that I do not play golf.
okay, okay. And but being from North Carolina, I mean, when it comes to sort of with stuff with music, was there any inspiration about music around during those days?
Yeah, church.
Okay,
Almost daily, because my grandmother was, um, I wouldn't say radical, but she was very much committed to her spiritual journey. And so we spent a lot of time in church. And she was also my inspiration, because she walked around the house singing, while cleaning or cooking, and she had a beautiful voice. And she encouraged me to sing. I probably stood by my grandma, and she taught me a few things. She taught me how to cook.
okay,
I,
yeah.
I stood by my grandmother's side while she cooked and baked, and I learned how to cook and bake, and from scratch. And I take pride in having that, and that it came from my grandmother.
You know, it's interesting because from those of us who aren't in the US, there's the lot of the perception we have is you've got so much things like basketball, football, baseball, and sports generally would dominate. But for you, you said singing became more of an inspiration and a vessel more so than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I played sports as a kid, out in the streets with my friends in the neighborhood. But music was really always my calling, and I knew it. Like, I never had to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I just continued to do what I do, and that's sing. And it has the next thing that happened, and the next thing that happened seemed like the next logical thing that would happen in
Yeah.
my career as I was growing into it, from show to show, from audition to audition, and finally getting into the Duke Ellington School of the Arts as a junior in high school. It just seemed like, I didn't have to figure it out. I didn't. What am I going to do with my life? I didn't have to do any of that.
What do you mean? Did it just were doors just opening without you having to go looking for them?
Okay. Okay. So I was a student at the Duke Ellington School of the Arts.
Yeah.
And at the time, the founders of the school were still alive and very much involved in the everyday running of the school. And Mike Malone, one of the founders, became a friend of mine. And every summer there was a program called the Summer Youth Employment Program that the mayor of DC had started, Mayor Marion Barry. And because of that
Oh,
program,
Marion Barry.
yeah, he was one of DC's favorite mayors, even
Yeah,
with all the troubles that he had.
yeah.
Um, Even if he were alive today, he'd probably be mayor of DC. um, while I was doing that program, and that's really where we got the fundamental um, basics about what it was going to require. The rehearsal time, the dedication. We're going to do it until we get it right, and we're not leaving until we get it right. All that kind of attitude. Um, my third summer, which was my last summer after that I aged out of the program, was
Yeah.
the last summer that I could do the program, and I was a senior in high school. And Mike Malone, who we highly revered, came to me and put his hand on my shoulder at the end of that summer and said, "You are ready. You can go with my blessing to New York." And I thought I had been blessed by the king. I mean, I really felt like, if Mike Malone says that I'm ready, then I'm ready. And and which is funny, because when I auditioned for the school initially, he didn't want me in.
Oh,
He didn't think I was ready. But there was a lady there who also later became one of my friends. She said, "Yeah, but the boy can shine." And I got in. And so Mike gave me his blessing. I didn't leave, I graduated high school in 1982. I didn't leave DC until 1984, when I was working a regular job. And I heard about an audition that Mike Malone was having in New Jersey at the Crossroads Theater, which is one of the premier Black theaters in the country. And I quit my job when I heard about the audition.
Because
I quit.
Mike was the one doing it.
Yeah, but I didn't know that wasn't an automatic that I was going to be in because he was doing it. But I just quit my job.
Wow.
I quit my job. I didn't do it in a way that would allow me to come back. I was the manager at that point. I told my assistant, "You're the boss." And he was like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I'm out. I'm out." He said, "What do you mean out?" I'm saying, "I'm never coming back." And I left. We drove up to New Jersey, did the audition, and my cousin and I, and we both were cast. We both were cast in the show. But the thing was that I had no idea of what the pay was going to be. So it turns out the pay was $35 a week.
Okay.
And nobody can survive off of $35.
Okay. Not even in 84.
Not even in 84. And so that required us to have to live in the theater that we were working in.
Oh.
So I slept under my dressing room table for 6 months.
Wow.
Which was fine. I mean, I was having the time of my life. We were having the time of our lives. It was a time that I would not go back and change any part of, because it was like paying my dues. Like I was paying my dues, and I knew that that's what was happening, but we were having the time of our lives. So it was really great. That show was over. Oh, so while we were rehearsing for the show, one of the band members came over to me at probably about maybe a month in. And he said, "I don't know about these other guys, but you are a star."
Wow.
I know I never really thought that of myself, and no one had ever said that to me before. And I thought, "What do you mean?" He's like, you got it. You have that it thing that's going to take you there. And I was like, "Okay, whatever." But then the show was over, and by the time the show was over, he and I, Daryl Mull is his name, he's a New Yorican, Black Puerto Rican guy from Harlem, very high energy, typical New York energy.
Yeah.
And after the show was over, I started working on some music with him, and we wrote a demo together, a song called "Don't Hold Out," and then I I was kind of on the fence about whether I'm going to stay in New York or go back to DC, and I wasn't really feeling good about my time. I had auditioned for this one particular show, Mama, I Want to Sing, which is the longest the longest off-Broadway show in off-Broadway history.
Mm.
And so I had done the show for a while. I was kind of ready to go back, but a few days before I was scheduled to go back, we went out to check out a band. Checked out the band. The band was good. And afterwards, the place was packed. It was so packed, it was a fire hazard, not even room. There was not even enough space if somebody were to fall, or there wasn't room for that.
Yeah.
So the band leader came afterwards because he was a friend of Daryl. He was like, "Yo, what did y'all think?" And I'm young and cocky, and I say, "No, y'all were all right." You had one crucial element that was missing, though, that would have really made it pop. He said, "What's that?" I said, "Me."
Okay.
So,
You started to believe in yourself now. What's going on?
and so I started. He said, "Okay, here's your time. Here's your time to shine." So I started singing for him in this crowded room, and there was a gentleman standing behind me that I wasn't even aware that was behind me. And he turned around. I guess he heard me, and he said, he goes, where did you come from?" And I'm sure I said something sarcastic. And he gave me his card, introduced himself as Ted Courier, and I held on to his card for about 2 weeks. But when I did call him, it was about 11 p.m., which is not unusual for a musician, especially if you're working. And he was excited to hear from me and was wondering why it took so long for me to call him. And he was in the studio in New York. I was staying in New Jersey at this point. He was in the studio at Unique Recording on 47th and 7th. And he invited me over. So I had to get on the bus, get on the PATH train, get on the subway, and then walk up to the studio. And when I got there, he had Parliament Funkadelic in
George
studio.
Clinton.
And I was like, what?
George Clinton a part of that as was
No,
there?
no, no, George wasn't there.
Okay, okay.
But he is part but he had Gary Cooper. You remember the guy that wore the diaper, played
Yeah,
bass?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Gary
yeah.
Scheider,
Okay.
who became a really good friend of mine. He was there. Michael Cooper, several of the other
Members
notable
of, yeah.
players, but George was not there. But they were recording, and they were working on a project for the Boogie Boys. And the Boogie Boys had just come off of a fly girl, fly girl. Right, it was a big hit record for them in the '80s, and they were working on the follow-up to that. So I meet Daryl there, and I was blown away that uh, Parliament was there. But side note, I learned what funk music was all about because they
Okay.
didn't smell too good.
Yeah.
It's the truth. And it's about so the funk music is a real thing. It came from that. They wouldn't bathe for
Wow.
days.
Wow.
They wouldn't bathe for days.
Oh, goodness.
They did. And so my friend Daryl, in his New York cocky way, was like, "Yo, Ted, if you put my boy Tony in the booth, you'll fire all them jokers." And Ted was like, "Oh, really?" Of course, he had just smoked a joint about the size of my thumb, and he was like, "Okay." And then he called whoever was in the booth out. I don't remember who it was, but he sent me in. And then they started giving me parts to do on this record, and I was nailing him. One take, boom. He started calling me One Take Tony, and it happened so fast. Uh, while I was working on that project, well, he did fire Parliament. He fired them, and I ended up doing the vocals on that project. So while I was recording, his wife and partner asked me to come into this room and sing for this group of people that were there that I was unaware of who they were, and I was already recording. I was warmed up, so I walked into the room and sang for them, and I sang "Ribbon in the Sky." And when I left that room, they offered me a 7-album deal, just like that. And I didn't even have time to prepare. I wasn't nervous because I didn't know who I was. I didn't know that they were Capitol Records. I didn't know that I was auditioning. I was just singing. And so it turned into that. I got a 7-album deal on Capitol Records. And the gentleman who was responsible for me in the A&R department was fired soon after I got signed. And the music business is an ego-driven business. So the next guy who replaced him was not really interested in me because he didn't sign me. He was
Yeah.
interested in making his mark by signing and discovering his own acts. And so the gentleman that was fired was hired at Epic, and he convinced Epic Records over at Sony to buy my contract from Capitol. And all this happened before I sang a note.
Okay. Now, I wanted to get back a little bit to the fact that you were in theater,
Mm-hmm.
and I would assume that there's a difference in the theater type of work, and were you thinking career-wise, Broadway and stuff, or did you just think recording artists in those early days?
At that time, I didn't have a focus, like what it was going to be specifically.
Yeah.
Because growing up, I had done some recording, I'd done some theater work. I liked it all. There were things that I learned fundamentally in theater that would apply to, let's say, doing a concert every night. And so it didn't really, it was kind of like whatever one paid the most,
Okay.
whichever one's check cleared first is the one I'm gonna do.
But then in those
So
days, though, did you get to know because as I said, with the theater, it looks as if those in theater work a lot harder, but don't get as paid and as much as say recording. But for yourself, it was just the experience, things moving so quickly.
listen, the theater world is much more work. When I was doing Mama, I Want to Sing,
Yeah.
which was a 2.5-hour show,
Wow.
we did 10 shows a week. 10.
Wow.
And we would do three of those 10 shows would happen on Saturday.
Wow.
So by Saturday night, you would be completely spent. But we were young, 21, 22.
Yeah.
You could do three shows and then go out to the club. And then,
Okay.
which we did a few times. um, but the experience, the work ethic I had
Yeah.
already gotten from being a student at Duke Ellington. So it
Oh,
wasn't
okay.
that much, it wasn't that challenging. Um, I think the theater work it might be a little bit more difficult in terms of, let me use Shakespeare as an example, because it's something that everybody knows about. And it's a piece it's a period piece, but you can't improv Shakespeare.
Mm.
You have to do the lines as they
Yeah.
are written. You
Yeah.
can't change anything. Otherwise, you're not doing Shakespeare.
Mm.
And the difference in like doing a concert or whatever is that I have the liberty to talk about something differently every night. I have the liberty to change my song up a little bit if I want to. I
Yeah.
have those liberties that I don't have doing legit theater.
Yeah.
And so I got to appreciate both mediums for the differences that they had.